This is Duke University.
All black, everything black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here on location in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University, and we're specifically here in the Hip Hop Archive.
Yes.
To my right, Professor Christopher Emdin.
Yes, sir.
Brand new spanking associate professor.
Yes, excited about
it. At Teachers College at Columbia University. One of the leading scholars trying to bring together this link between STEM research, right? Science, technology, education, math, and bringing that stuff into the classroom, particularly around hip hop.
Yes, sir.
Most well known this past summer for the Science Genius Contest, and currently now a fellow, hip hop fellow.
Yes.
Here at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at the Hip Hop Archive. Yep. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Great to be here with you live in person. We spoke once before online,
so let's just start with your work, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure that when you explain to people what you do, you a scientist, are you a math professor? What's this hip hop thing? Or are you teaching kids complex equations by having them rap them? What's this about? You know, how would, if you had to give the 2-minute package for our audience about what your work is, what it does, what you're hoping to achieve with it, what would that be?
I mean, my work is who I am in many respects. So I am a scientist by training, an active biochemist, a master's in natural sciences. So I tell them first and foremost, I am a scientist.
And let's hold on to that before we even go forward, because just that description of yourself, right, has to raise eyebrows, right? When folks see you, right, young African-American man describing himself as a scientist, we can even get into the Bronx thing, which we will.
Of course. We have no choice but to.
So that's who you are, right? You are a scientist.
I am a scientist. And I always begin an introduction to who I am with that. Because there's oftentimes a perception that I'm coming into the world of education or science education as a sort of amateur or someone who doesn't have any positioning within the world of science. So I always have to begin with that. I mean, it's unfortunate that I have to do so, because if I was to introduce myself to somebody who's outside of the world of academia, the first thing I would say is that I am hip hop. But to them, I say I am science.
And you were a scientist in private industry.
Absolutely.
Before you came to academia.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's important for folks to understand also, right?
Yeah. So, you know, I did stem cell research at RPI. I did some research on the etiology of schizophrenia as an undergraduate student. So that, you know, my love is in science. And then I'm also hip hop. So I was raised in the Bronx in New York City. I grew up listening to hip hop music. Hip hop inspires everything about me, to my style, to my dress, to my walk, to my talk, to the way I think.
To your cadence.
To my cadence.
As I'm sitting here watching you now.
You know, I think I rhyme in metaphor. You know, I spit bars as I speak. And so my research is an outgrowth of that, realizing that, you know, in the world, in the eyes of many people in the world, those things are mutually exclusive. You know, being scientific and being hip hop or being into education are seen as
being scientific and being black.
Right. You know, all those things are just seen as they don't come together. And the reality is that, you know, if you talk to young people, or if you go into schools and you go into communities, I just met via email a young man here, who's an undergraduate at Harvard, who was saying that, you know, there are no other models for where these things come together, but those are who I am. You know, he's an oceanographer. And, you know, so my work is to show people that those worlds that we oftentimes perceive to be not having anything to do with each other actually are really interrelated. And there's a whole generation of young people who make these connections just by existing in the world, but they're forced to separate themselves from these connections because of how we see them. And so my work is essentially to make sure that that young person who's a scientist, a hip hop head, you know, an African American young man, a Latina young man or young lady, who have the same identity, don't have to feel like they're an oddball, don't have to feel like they're an anomaly, don't have to feel like they have no space and no place in academia or in the world. And you know, my research is to bring visibility to that population.
Talk a little bit about Science Genius, this program that you've been running now.
I mean, you know, Science Genius has been a blessing. It's given me the opportunity to merge science and hip hop in a very unique and interesting way that's also really simple and organic way. And Science Genius is a partnership between myself, Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan, and the website rapgenius.com. And what we decided to do was create, you know, science battles, hip hop battles. You know, in the tradition of the smack battles, except no one's getting punched or cursed out, But that competition.
Or these kung fu movies that Marcelina Morgan was talking about.
You know, this is hip hop. Hip hop is so rooted in competition, but friendly competition. Yeah. Competition for the purpose of making us better.
Yeah.
And so we get these young kids. We say, listen, you're learning science, you're learning biology, you're learning chemistry, you're learning physics, and we want you to be able to put those concepts that you're learning in the science classes to rhyme. And you know, usually you get the, you know, he wants us to rap science, like this dude is corny. And I'm saying, listen, y'all, not only am I asking you to write these science bars, but there are kids in other schools who are doing the exact same thing, and those kids can spit. And those kids know their science, you know. And once that element of competition gets infused into all of a sudden they're like, well, let me show you what I can do. And the level of complexity in their knowledge of the science, but also in their ability to rap and rhyme has been mind-boggling. And right now, there's all this immense data that I've collected showing that these students who are part of this competition show up to school more often, are more interested in science after the program, get higher test scores in school. Thinking about college. I mean, we had one young man who won, who initially said, I'm not going to college. And then after he became one of the finalists for the Science Genius competition, went and walked down to a local university and enrolled. And essentially, he started realizing that to be an academic, to be a scholar, to be a college student, and to be hip hop, I can do them all, you know, as 2 Chainz will say at the same damn time, you know. And so once there's no contradictions, and once you realize that, then you know, then the world opens up. Yeah. You know.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here on location at Harvard University at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute. We're specifically here at the Hip Hop Archive, housed in the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute. We're here with Professor Christopher Emdin, again, brand new, spanking new, tenured associate professor at Teachers College, Columbia University. We were talking a while back, a few weeks ago, Chris, and you're talking about this kind of ability to spit in the competition. We were talking about Kendrick Lamar.
Yes.
Right, and the lyric that everybody wanted to talk about, I'd be hard-pressed to think of, perhaps even in the last decade, there's been a lyric that had people talking about lyricism that way. Yeah. And I'm an old head, right? So my first response to it was like, okay, that was cool. And then on my Facebook page, I dropped Rakim's 21 MC's line and said, you know, and did my metaphoric drop the mic and, and left the scene. But talk about that element of competition, particularly as it relates to the kind of work that you do. But for some reason, it's something that's almost been lost in hip hop, you know, in recent years.
Yeah, I think it's something that's been lost in the hip hop that is most visible. But it's something that's always been present in hip hop, you know, in the underground. And you know, the hip hop battle, you know, that it's actually taken on it has a resurgence in the last maybe 2-3 years because it's become so absent from mainstream hip hop. Yeah. And so, you know, Kendrick, we actually had a hip hop ed discussion on Kendrick Lamar's lyric. Right. And, you know, you guys, if you go online.
And talk a little bit about the hip hop ed.
Well, you know, I'll start with hip hop ed, then I'll get into Kendrick. Yeah. You know, hip hop ed is a online chat on Twitter. It's every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And we have a conversation every Tuesday night about the intersections of hip hop and education, and, you know, and just what's going on in the world. And in essence, we're helping educators to be able to make sense of the world using a lens of hip hop, giving them online professional development for free every week. Yeah. And so hip hop ed has been amazing. You know, I come from the world of science, but I'm also an educator at heart. So we delve into the intersections of English and hip hop education. We talk about Kendrick Lamar and hip hop and education. How do you bring Kendrick Lamar's lyrics into the classroom?
It sounds like someone needs to send Arnie Duncan the hashtag.
Listen, Arnie Duncan, I know you guys know Left of Black is popping, and I know you're watching this. Arnie Duncan, get your folks together and get on hip hop ed, because you are missing what's happening in education right now. We're telling you what you need to do. You know what I mean? Get familiar, homeboy. But yeah, man, hip hop ed is just amazing. And so we had a chat on Control. And we were talking to teachers about how they can use that song in the classroom. And some of the ideas that came out of the chat were, one, this idea of competition. Kendrick dropped that verse, and the day after, everybody from Joel Ortiz to you know, Papoose, you know, everybody had a response immediately, because that's what hip hop does. You know, if you challenge me, then I have to rise to the competition. Even if I'm not as good, I'm going to show you what it is that I can do.
Right, yeah.
And that is, it's a pedagogical moment. You know, if teachers realize that students who are bored in the classrooms respond.
They want to be challenged.
To competition and to being challenged. Then you can be a better teacher. Right. You know, we oftentimes have this notion that our youth, you know, just don't do well because they don't want to do well. They oftentimes don't do well because they don't feel like they're being challenged.
Right. There's no expectations placed.
And it doesn't have anything to do with me. You see, what Kendrick did by naming names, he's saying, listen, not only am I talking to all these MCs I named, but the whole coast. Right? So when he calls out the whole coast is forced to respond. Right. It's the difference between a student saying to a teacher, I'm not doing your homework, because it's your homework, versus I'm not doing the homework, or I didn't do the homework. You see, what Kendrick did, he changed it from y'all to the. Right. And when he switched it to the, meaning I'm calling everybody out, then everybody has to step their game up.
And, you know, it's interesting, you know, the most important teaching lesson I ever learned, you know, long time ago, teaching at Walton High School up in the Bronx. And they were having problems with kids being in class. And I'd be trying to do this kind of pulp culture thing that, you know, has become what I do now. Right. Didn't know what the hell I was doing back in 1990. Right. I was always struck by the kids that would stop by my classroom, listening on the classroom, and just stand there, right? And I'm like, and my strategy was, I know you done left your class, but why don't you just come inside, right? And what I understood was that what they were telling me is that I see something of value that reflects who I am, right?
In this place.
And it fundamentally changed how I thought about what my classroom should look like.
Absolutely. And you know, this is the thing, is that a lot of teachers like you, and by the way, I live 3 blocks away from Walton High School. What a small world, right? You know, BX, stand up. You know, BK2. But you know, the thing that I think is powerful about that statement you just made is that there are literally thousands of educators across the country who, just by virtue of wanting to reach their students, enact these types of powerful practices. There are hip hop educators across the country, but they're existing in isolation. Yeah. They're existing below the radar. They're sneaking in pop references when their administrators aren't watching. Right. You know, they're sneaking in lyrics into their classroom, you know, as soon as the person who's coming to tell them to follow the curriculum leaves. Yeah. And what we're trying to do with this hip hop ed movement and with this larger reality pedagogy movement, and that's the new project we're working on, is reality pedagogy, is we're saying these folks who are hiding are actually the most powerful educators. Yeah. So why can't we create a consortium of these educators and take this idea and move it around the country, because those are the people who are going to move the agenda forward for the black and brown young people in schools.
Let me ask you this question, right? Because you're, even within the academy, you're not an outlier, right? There are a bunch of folks doing some great work. Who would you tell our audience to read, that they need to be reading, who are really writing about these kinds of intersections?
Right, I mean, in the spirit of hip hop, you know, I got to talk about me. Like, you need to cop my book ASAP and get familiar with Science Genius and Hip Hop Ed. But beyond that, Hip Hop Genius by Sam Seidel is an amazing book that talks about how hip hop and education and the whole feel of hip hop, not just in the curriculum, can be infused into a classroom and into a school. Mark Lamont Hill's book, Beats, Rhymes, and Classroom Life, is an amazing example of the use of poetry and lyrics in an after-school classroom session. I mean, my really, really good friend, Bettina Love.
Yes.
I mean,
who's been on Left to Black, right? Man, so check the archive.
Tina is the truth. I don't shout out everybody. I love Bettina Love, and her book is absolutely amazing. And I wrote a description of the work. I mean, she sent me the book before it went out, and it was just amazing. And it just talks about the woman's experience with and in hip hop and the contradictions within that, and it's so applicable to what can happen in classrooms. So I think those would be my top 3, including my own. You know what I mean? But beyond that, I mean, there are folks who haven't written books. You know, this. Right. I feel like the kind of scholar or academic that understands that, you know, there's a lot of privilege that comes with being in academia, but knowledge doesn't exist because you're in academia. Right. And so, you know, I hear truth and knowledge and power related to hip hop and education in folks who don't have academic degrees. I mean, you know, Jasiri X's work and One Hood Media. I mean, you know, how could you not co-sign that? My boy Emil Cook, who's who's a teacher out in Pittsburgh, doing amazing work with young people. Ian P. Levy, and I mean, so again, you know, my main point is this: I do work because I do work that I think is necessary. And I'm a scientist and a STEM guy, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, you know, those are my go-to areas. But whenever I need inspiration, I leave academia.
Right, there's a whole
other there's a whole other community of folks doing really good work. And And you know, my last point on this is, and those folks are intellectuals, those folks are scholars, those folks are thinkers, on par with or even surpassing a lot of folks with PhDs behind their name.
You're watching Left to Black. We're here with Professor Chris Emdin, of course, from Teachers College, Columbia University, a hip hop fellow here at the Hip Hop Archive at the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University. We're on location today up in Cambridge. We had this great opportunity. You just mentioned Jasiri X, right? Particularly One Hood Media.
Yeah.
We had this great opportunity a few days ago to spend some time with the legendary William Julius Wilson, right? And talking about this gap between the kind of job skills that young black men have and where the jobs are, and how there literally is this kind of physical distance between them being locked into inner cities and all these jobs popping off, right? And there's all kinds of narratives, you know, Professor Wilson didn't necessarily get into this, but the struggle that young black men have even with driver's license, right? You know, so literally there's no public transportation, all this kind of stuff. Right. But it got us talking about this kind of entrepreneurial spirit that's always been in hip hop. And in the case of Professor Wilson, it's what drew him to the narratives of The Wire, right? Because it's about these guys kind of taking control of the means of production, right? In order to create something for themselves. And we got into a really interesting question about, you know, discussion about, you know, this kind of government stuff that's happening to link, you know, certain kind of businesses to poor, downtrodden young folks, right? To try to socialize them to come into the workforce, if you will. And how in some ways that's so counter hip hop, because hip hop more than anything has created its own mechanisms. So talk a little bit about this. I mean, and I know you know this specifically in terms of, you know, cats being brought into certain kind of technology companies and science companies. I mean, talk a little bit about this disconnect.
The basic argument for me is this. There's oftentimes a perception that the STEM industries, you know, if you have anything to do with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we need to blindly usher young people of color into those fields. And the statistics are there. You know, STEM workers make 26 times more than the average worker. That's where we have the most jobs, et cetera. And so there's this notion that if you push folks into STEM, then they'll be successful. Unfortunately, a lot of the new government initiatives that have been sort of endorsed federally have focused on partnerships between schools and these institutions and these conglomerates who are in STEM, and saying, listen, partner up with a small school, partner up with a school, and then create the workers who have access to your industry. And the layperson looks at this and says, oh man, like that's amazing. Because you're going to get all these young black and brown kids to be working in these STEM companies. But the reality is that these students are being trained for very low-level, low-skilled works within those institutions. So in many respects, that's replicating the same kind of issues that we had historically with having black and brown folks being pushed into manufacturing jobs. So, you know, when the Moynihan report says, you know, that you can't have a sustained black economic base by having black and brown people only work in low-level manufacturing jobs. We are replicating that same process by having black and brown folks being ushered into low-level, placing them in low-level STEM jobs, and saying just because they're in STEM that they'll be fine, because there are folks within those disciplines.
And yeah, they might be making better money than they might have working in the service industry, but in terms of long-term success, right?
Bro,
in terms of a long game.
The issue is that the service industry exists in any domain. So I can have a service industry when I'm talking about in STEM. And so, you know, and this is why my work.
Because if you're doing customer service for
a big tech company or pharmaceutical company, you know, technically you're working in STEM. But in reality, you're so low on that totem pole that you might as well not be. And this is why Science Genius is important. Because, you know, we're telling young people, listen, we want you to have access to STEM, but we also want you to have a command of the language and the discourse and the knowledge. And so when a young person like Jabari Johnson from Harlem spits some bars about work and kinetic energy, he is not going to go take an entry-level job related to STEM and energy. He has higher expectations because he has higher knowledge. And so we're not training our young people just to enter the service industry in STEM. And I'm going to coin that. There's the STEM service industry. You know what I mean? We want them to be the folks who are doing the thinking, the innovation, because that is hip hop.
And that's the thing, right? And not to pat ourselves on the back right now, these are the conversations that happen in hip hop all the time. But when we talk about the larger media's perception of it, Right. I mean, how often did we have to hear some sort of ridiculous link between Miley Cyrus and hip hop over the last 3 weeks at the expense of so many other fruitful discussions?
Right. And the thing is, and Miley Cyrus is so anti-hip hop. No, genuinely, like, so, you know, there's this link to Miley Cyrus and hip hop, but her presence is so anti-hip hop.
Right.
Because, you know, hip hop is not spectacle.
Right.
You know, unbeknownst to the perception of, you know, people that look at her on there doing all this stuff. It's such a spectacle. It's hip hop. No, hip hop is community.
Right.
Right. Hip hop.
Right.
And if there ends up being a spectacle in hip hop, oftentimes, it's oftentimes an underground movement that bubbles over to create a new thing that the world hadn't seen before, that they're just so dazzled by that it becomes perceived as spectacle. Oftentimes, when you see it in mainstream, once it hits MTV, that's become a culture that's existed for a very long time. But you know, let me stop, because I'm gonna go deep, and I'm gonna go deep. I'm gonna go ham on Miley Cyrus. You know what I mean? And I know there are Miley lovers out there, because, you know, I actually, you know, I did a Facebook post about this the other day. I said, you know, I wrote a piece. As soon as I saw the Miley Cyrus thing, I was so upset that I wrote this really detailed piece about minstrelsy, and it was so heavy on my heart and my mind. And then at the last minute, I said, you know what? I'm not going to put this piece out, because by putting this piece out, I'm supporting this whole push to make that seem that it is what is hip hop, and it's important. So I'm, you know, I tossed it.
I would talk about a teaching thing, right? And we've talked a little bit about this before as we were sitting here having this conversation, listening to the sirens in the background, right? The difference between shooting out show in the basement in Durham and being up here in Cambridge. But I've heard you talk about the way that you use the natural environment, right? And you train teachers to use the natural environment of the hood in order to teach science, right? So, you know, that was the moment for the Doppler effect.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When we were talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson, that was the conversation that we had, and he was like, man, so you talk about the sirens can be used for the Doppler effect? And I said, absolutely, yes it can. So you see, pedagogy, you know, teaching and learning, this is hip hop. Hip hop is, let's go back to Kendrick Lamar. Hip hop is Kendrick Lamar calling out rappers at 4 p.m. and rappers being in the studio at 4:30. Crafting a response, right? There's a certain element of immediacy.
It's about the work. It's about the work. It's about the labor.
And it's in the moment, right? So the preparation comes, but the preparation is there. But there has to be this malleability in how you interact with people who are in front of you to learn from you, because that's how you make the work relevant. And that's what hip hop does. And so what we do with my teachers, you know, we got teachers at Teachers College at Columbia University. And we get on a train and we go on hood tours. Have you heard me talk about this before?
I have not.
Oh yes, sir, we do. I'm like, listen. So here you are at this Ivy League institution. Welcome. You know, we're glad you're here at Columbia.
But now we're gonna get on the train.
Now let's go see New York, because Morningside Heights is Morningside Heights, but Harlem is up the street, and you ain't been there yet, right? So let's get on this bus, let's get on this train, and let's go see what's going on in the hood, and how can we utilize that information to be able to be better teachers?
And the helicopter parent, right, is texting them, right, while they're on the subway.
Oh man,
are you in class? No, he's taking us to Harlem.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I had a young lady from Elon University in North Carolina, and you know, I'm like, listen, you want to be an urban educator? That's what you really want to do? Are you really about this life?
Right.
You know, if you're really about this life, let's go.
Right. You ain't doing Teach for America,
no,
right?
Man.
Right.
So we're hitting the projects up. We're going to the bodegas. We're going to the parks. Have your notebooks open. We're going to 1520 Sedgwick. You're writing notes, and then you're writing your lesson plan as you would normally. Right. And then my assignment to you is to let me see that lesson plan, and what aspects of the experiences that you just had on your hood tour are you incorporating into the lessons that you're going to be using to teach? Right. Because, you know, we oftentimes blame our students for not responding to teaching, and we blame them for having low test scores, and we blame them for whatever else it is in the world. But how responsive is the education system, the curriculum, the teachers, the books to their realities? Because the realities of other young people who are most successful on those measures of success are completely aligned to their life experiences. Right. So you can't fault our students for not being able to be successful if the instruction that they're receiving is misaligned from their reality.
Right.
You know, it's like common sense, fam. It's common sense, Arnie. It's common sense, and these folks are not, and they can't pick it up. And you know, this is the movement, and I will not stop. I will not rest. I will not cease until every school in this country that teaches Black and brown students of color understand that you cannot teach them without you doing the work to understand their realities, and your responsibility is to incorporate their realities into your instruction. And if you're not incorporating their realities into your instruction, then you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you cannot blame those young people for not responding. Real talk.
If you don't know who this man is, this is Professor Christopher Emdin, Associate Professor.
Emdin, that's all. That's all.
I'm trying to make you one of the babyface brothers. But this is
Think about you
Professor.
all the time.
If you don't know this man, this is Professor Christopher Emdin, Associate Professor, teaches college, Columbia University, fellow here at the Hip Hop Archive at W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University.
Yes, sir.
What's next for you, Chris?
Man, writing a book now on reality pedagogy, growing this idea of hip hop ed to be not only an online thing, but also a physical team where we have a team of educators converging on your school, USA, to make you responsive. You know, creating a larger partnership between the archive and Columbia University to see how we can educate these Ivy Leaguers to be, you know, also real life talkers, you know, and then just never ceasing in the work, expanding Science Genius to include other disciplines, you know, doing Story Genius, where we can get some of the history and the social studies and the English folks on board as well, but knowing it started with science. The idea is just to grow the movement to transform education.
Christopher Emdin. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, your host of Left to Black. By the way, we're both Bronx cats.
BX all day, right?
And both graduates of Brooklyn Technical High School.
Can we just stop really quick and talk about tech?
Yes.
That's the greatest high school in the United States. It's the greatest high school in the United States. Every person I meet that graduates from tech is brilliant beyond measure. Brooklyn Tech, stand up. Brooklyn, stand up. BX, stand up. Right?
Mark Anthony Neal, Left to Black. We're here at the Hip Hop Archive
Yes,
at
sir.
the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute, where we are on location. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
Thank you,
Appreciate you.
The work was just something that got me inside the door. Now we squaring the V and it's exponentially more. I got a lot in store for the V's because I'm progressing my M. And when you multiply them, there's no end to the kinetic energy. You better be prepared. Filling you up with envy with my 1FMB squared. Yo, here's a lesson. I know it kind of hurts, but if you truly want to work, then there must be progression. Cause FD equals W's the rule. And the unit measurement for the product is called joules. Cool, I did the work. I'ma try to let it flow. The more people I know, kinetic energy grows. So I'ma go to work, convert all of my potential. And as my speed increases, then I'ma go exponential.